Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit loving host, inviting you to another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Ashley Iman. I'm here to talk with her and celebrate the book birthday of her debut picture book titled Ruby Rene Had So Much to Say. We'll talk about her work, her new book, and the powerful, powerful message that it sends. Ashley, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here.
I love when I get to celebrate recent book birthdays, but I really love when it's the author's first book birthday. It's just such an honor to be part of the process and your launch, and I can't wait to share your beautiful book with everyone.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a really long time coming, so.
Yes, yes. And it's here.
Yeah.
So let's jump in. I already mentioned your new debut picture book is titled Ruby Rene. Had so much to say. It's beautiful. It's powerful. It has a wonderful message inside. But before we start talking about that, I'd love for you to talk about you and give us a little background about you, your journey to picture book writing, and why this book right now.
Yeah. So I have always loved reading as a kid. I was a really avid reader. And I was a teacher. I taught right after undergrad, and I loved teaching. I still am in education. Right now, I train teachers. But I will say that there's always been this part of me that wanted to write still, and I just couldn't quite figure out, um, what book I was going to write, or what avenue I would kind of, come at this from, especially because I was a middle school teacher, right? So for a while, I thought maybe like middle grades literature was more my speed. But this idea of Ruby and the experience that I had, in elementary school just kept gnawing at me. And so when it came time to think about like what would be the first book that I would write, it had to be about, 8-year-old Ashley who ultimately becomes Ruby in this book.
I love that. We have a lot of things in common. We were both teachers. We both now work in teacher education. I'm a teacher education instructor. I teach children's literature, and I can so relate with that little voice in the back that's just whispering. And I'm so glad you listened to it. That you took your inner child that was still there, and you brought it to life in this book,
Mhm.
so that other kids could benefit, could experience perhaps something different if parents and teachers also read this book. And so that was one of my questions for you is, are you inside this book? Are do you have a piece of Ruby in you? And you answered that. So tell me a little bit about that, and that'll give listeners a bit of context for what the book is about too.
Oh, yes. I am absolutely Ruby. In some ways, I am still Ruby. Like I definitely was that very curious child. In the book, Ruby is really inspired by podcasts. Podcasts were not as popular when I was an 8-year-old. I don't even know if they existed at that point, if I'm being really honest. But I listened to talk radio with my dad growing up. I'm a huge NPR fan. Have been like a member of my local station since I was like 16 in and had a little debit card and could, donate to my NPR station. So I love like learning new things. I kind of consider myself like a jack of all trades. I like to know a little bit about everything, and that is very much Ruby, right? Ruby is curious. She's excited to share. And so that a lot of like her character and her being so curious about the world and like talking to people, that is very much me.
Yeah. Now, in the book, that really wonderful, curious, inquisitive, let me share everything I know with everybody because I'm so excited and I want you to get excited with me. That feeling, that personality trait, if you will, it got a little squashed
Yeah.
in the book. Um, and so I'd love for you to speak about that too.
hmm Yeah, I think so for me, I as a kid, right, thinking about from Ruby's perspective, it does feel like, but I am talking about something positive. Like I want this is a good thing. Um and I had the other perspective when I became a teacher, right? I was Ruby and then I had Rubies in my classroom. Um, and as much as you want to hear from every little child in the room, I mean, I had 30 kids in a classroom with just me, and that can be really overwhelming. And so that was part of like why I wanted to write the book because I do genuinely see both sides in this, right? The kid who's really excited and the teacher who is just desperately trying to get through their lessons. And so yes, unfortunately Ruby does get squashed a little bit because she is doing a whole lot of talking and that poor teacher is just trying to make it through the day.
Yeah. Yeah, and as an educator, I completely related to that tension of both wanting Ruby to just go, 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 keep going. This is the most amazing life skill you could ever have, which is to want
Yeah.
to keep learning. And then on the other side, knowing, okay, there is a teacher who is trying to get through what she has to get through. And so I could see both. And I think that's why it made this book so powerful for me. Any teacher reading this will feel it. Any librarian, any person who works with a decently sized group of children will probably understand, as well as any parent who's just trying to get through the day and
Yeah.
keep child's spirits high and their own sanity high at
Yes.
the same time. So the title, I wanted to ask you about the title because the title is Ruby Rene had so much to say. And
Mhm.
at first, when I glanced quickly, I thought it was Ruby Rene has so much to say. And I realized that one letter change
Mhm.
really does give us a message into what's to come in that
Mhm.
book. And so I love knowing about titles. I love words. So I really just thought about that for a bit. But I imagine that was purposeful to give a little hint into what perhaps might be coming or happened to Ruby.
It absolutely was, and I originally wrote it as "has," and then as we're experiencing it, we realized she actually does, in some ways, get silenced, and so it is a nice little kind of, like, twist in the title to, allude to what is going to happen to Ruby, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love nerding out on all sorts of stuff like that. Now, in the book, there's another piece that I especially loved, and listeners can't see me, but I get
Yeah.
to actually hold this beautiful book in my hands right now. But as a strategy, I guess, maybe a coping strategy or a way to keep her voice present, but perhaps do so without interrupting the rest of the school day. Ruby tries a journal.
Mhm.
This lavender colored journal that her dad gives her and says, you know, when you feel that urge, when you want to share, when you want to capture everything, just write it down. Is that something that you used to do as well? Because I'm a huge notebooker. I
Yeah.
still am. I think I probably still talk more to my notebook than I do to real people. And so I'm just so curious if that was something that worked for you that now Ruby's trying.
Yeah, that's very much real. I wrote this book during the pandemic, and so I, stopped by my parents' house just to kind of check on them, and I found the lavender journal, and that was part of like what started this, and really kind of helped focus the story a bit. So yes, when I was Ruby's age and I was talking a whole bunch in class, my dad did give me a little lavender journal and said, just write it all down. And I'm really grateful that he did that because I actually now have a very, very good record of my entire childhood because I
Yes.
never stopped, right? Like I have and my poor parents, I really hope that they never sell our house because my childhood bedroom is just filled with like volumes of me writing. From the time that I was 8 years old, and I still do it. I keep really, really meticulous journals now. But yes, that's how it started, and it was all about just like trying to keep me quiet in class. That was a strategy that I think in some ways did work, right? I stopped getting in trouble, but I didn't feel like I could share it. It kind of took the joy out of it, I think, a little bit.
Right. Right. Yeah. It gave you, it helped you one in one aspect, but in some ways kind of tampered or dampened, um, that voice just a little bit. But I
Yeah.
love hearing that was a real aspect for you. I am imagining what your bedroom must look like with the stacks of notebooks because I know how many I have, and I didn't start keeping them until later. So I can imagine what that is.
Yeah.
And I also can imagine, it was that kind of writing that ultimately brought you here, right? To this first picture book. You got that notebook and you never stopped.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
I love it. I have to ask, this is a little side note detour question because I just love notebooks. Do you have a favorite notebook that you write in? A certain kind, a certain type, a certain pen? Like, are you crazy like that? Like I am? Yeah.
I am. I really like the moleskin notebooks, and I
Yeah.
love a tool pen. Yes, it has I don't know why the tool pens are so much better to me, but the TUL tool pens are just top notch.
Okay, I haven't tried one.
Okay.
So now I will.
You should, and I only got into them because for work, I like to use, like, the disc planners, and I prefer the disc planners, and so I just kind of, like, got their matching pen, and I was like, "This is incredible. I love it so much."
Yeah. I I unapologetically lean into all of my favorite stationery supplies, and so when I get to ask someone that question, I jump right in, and now I have another pen that I can try. So let's talk about your work with teachers. Um,
Yeah.
I I love that this book will get into the hands of children who are inquisitive, who have something to say, and will really feel validated and seen in this picture book. But
Mhm.
I also love that it's going to get into teachers' hands and librarians' hands and, the educators themselves, because it does give us something to think about, right? We
Mhm.
know there's that tension of letting the child be as spirited as can be and also getting through our day. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you see this book impacting teachers, classrooms, schools, or what your hope is in impacting teachers, classrooms, and schools.
Yeah. I have never met a teacher who wanted, like, a classroom that was completely silent all the time and didn't want kids to express themselves, like, that has never been
Right.
my experience, and that is the nature of a lot of our classrooms simply from, like a desire to keep order, right? And so when I'm talking with teachers about how to set up their classroom culture, I really push them to make sure they're designing out of like what they hope for their kids and not out of fear. Right. So often when we are keeping kids like silent, we're just going to write. We're just going to be really, in our desk. We're not moving around. We're not doing group work. It's not because they don't want kids to like get up and be excited. It is more out of fear of that getting out of control or out of fear of us not being able to make it through the content, right? And so, what I really hope that teachers and school leaders are able to kind of start thinking about is what would it look like if we just were a little bit more imaginative about how we could allow students to express themselves, right? And really try to design out of like, hope and desire for kids versus,
Yeah.
designing out of fear.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Mhm.
That is a beautiful philosophy right there. And I kind of leaned into your website a little bit, trying to get to know you for the episode. And I did. I jotted down something that was so powerful that I think sums up what you just said, is that you want to develop teachers that can show up whole
Mhm.
and operate with joy. I mean, what a beautiful mission. And that's what this book is doing for those teachers, but for the kids who are showing up as they are in all of their wonderfulness and doing it happily. So I just love those connections that I think are going to instantly come to readers, but then we have this whole other wider influence of teachers and possibly changing the way they think and their stress levels of operating with joy. I love it. I just love how you are approaching your work. It's admirable.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I really try to think about like what is the system, right? Like what is the system that folks are existing in? Because people will do what like we allow them and what we set them up to do. And so when we have teachers that are not in a space really to cultivate that joy in their room, it is because we have created the conditions for them to be like in that place, right? So how
Right.
do we create the conditions for folks to be joyful, right? To show up as their best selves.
Yeah, I have a whole giant picture book collection. And in my work as a literacy coach, I do a lot of, as I'm sure you do, professional development and workshops and leading the learning of teachers. And I have found one of the most joyful ways to
Mhm.
start a professional learning session and to launch a conversation is through reading them a picture book, right? I know they're teachers, but I'll still stand up there and read the book or play it. You know, if there's a version online, we will play it. And I have found that, asking a teacher a question of, let's talk about this today. And there's crickets, right? It's like, okay, who's gonna say that first? But reading a book and then just pausing and saying, "What do we think?" That's when they get talking. And I've added your book, Ruby Renee Had So Much to Say, to my collection, my
Mhm.
resource list of books that could really launch these kind of important conversations in our schools. And I can't wait. I can't wait to do it, to read it for the first time in one of these sessions and just keep putting that book out there to the wider audience that I think really will need it and appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I love that idea. I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, of course. I'm grateful you wrote it and glad to include it. And even though Gladys is not here, the illustrator, I do want to point out this book is also gorgeous.
It's such a great job, right?
Yes, she did. The illustrations, they are bright, they are inviting. You really feel like you're there. But
Yeah.
what I think I love the most about what she has done, there are a lot of speech bubbles
Yeah.
and thought bubbles throughout the book. So if listeners can just imagine pages with these gorgeous characters and these gorgeous backdrops, and then a lot of speech bubbles and a lot of thought bubbles, she really captures, I think, Ruby's personality and the chatter of thoughts that are going on around her that she just desperately wants to get out for very positive, exciting reasons. I
Mhm.
feel like I experienced a little bit of what she was thinking and feeling throughout this book. And so I wanted to make sure I said that for listeners because it's as beautiful on the page as it is in the conception of the story and the lessons in it.
Oh, yes. Gladys did such a wonderful job really capturing that. And our incredible editor, Sydney, was really helpful in helping us try to like map this out because, as you can imagine, Ruby's talkative, I'm talkative. The original manuscript was really wordy, and Sydney did a really good job of helping us try to like make sure that like the sentiment right of everything that Ruby was trying to say was coming across in a way that would like still be inviting to in a children's book. And so Sydney did such a great job of kind of helping us craft that. And then Gladys did just knocked it out the park with really capturing Ruby's essence.
Yeah, she did. Even and the facial expressions, you just see this inquisitive, curious, happy child on the page. And I don't know how they do it, but I'm really glad that they do because it elevates the whole lesson and message in here when
Yeah.
you can just imagine kids like leaning in as it's going to be read. So it's just beautiful inside and out for that.
Yeah.
So Ruby Renee had so much to say. It was your debut picture book.
Yes.
Are there plans and, from your childhood journals or in your mind to keep going? Anything you can talk about that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm definitely working on other projects. I really hope this is not the last thing we hear from Ruby. She obviously has a lot more to say, more stories to tell. My family, we're from Gee's Bend, Alabama. We're known for our quilts, and I definitely would love to find a way to tell more of that story as well. And so definitely more things to come.
Oh, that's wonderful. I would love to keep getting to know Ruby. That is good news. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad. I'm glad you're not stopping with
Mhm.
one and that inner child who did all of that writing is just putting her notebooks out there in a different way.
Yes, definitely.
Wonderful. Well, where can listeners find out more about you, to connect with you, find Ruby Renee, and just get updates of what might be to come?
Yeah, I think the best place to go is my website. It's ashleyiman.com. And Iman's Iman. And then also you're welcome to follow me on Instagram. We post a lot of stuff there. That one's a bit more complicated. It's the @_Ashley.Iman. There was already another Ashley Iman. She got there first. So just like we had to put the period there.
Okay, and I'll make sure to put uh, direct links in the
Thank
show
you.
notes so that that's easier and they're not accidentally finding the wrong person.
Thank you.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much for coming on to the KidLit Love podcast. So grateful to be part of your launch of your first picture book and so honored to put Ruby Renee in so many people's hands. It's a beautiful book. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this.
Oh, I loved it. And listeners, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. And I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.